everybody, what's happening? Brent Axe here from syracuse.com, and we are live, baby. We are live following Syracuse's 51-21 win over the UConn Huskies. So depending on, for entertainment purposes only, how you got that game, if you got it at 30, you pushed. If you got it at 27.5 or 28 or 29.5, you're feeling good about that one. But Syracuse, nonetheless, with a big win over Connecticut by a final score of 51-21. And for the first time since 1991, the Syracuse football team has started a season 4-0. It's one of a few times in the modern era that Syracuse has started 4-0. The team in 1959 that won a national championship started 4-0. The next season, Syracuse actually started 5-0 in 1960. That team finished 7-2. The 1987 Orange, what'd they do after starting 4-0? Oh, they just went undefeated and 11-0-1. And the 1991 team that we mentioned finished 10-2 and beat Ohio State in the Hall of Fame Bowl. So Syracuse football team starting 4-0 certainly have very good company. We are chatting with you about it live here today, brought to you by our friends at Krause Health. So you guys get in the comment section, do your thing. I'll respond to some of you guys coming up here momentarily. But Syracuse took care of business in this game as anticipated. This is a UConn team that came in 129th in the country in several defensive categories, otherwise known as dead last in several defensive categories in college football. There was a couple of hiccups here and there. Syracuse actually could have piled on more points. They had a touchdown from Jarvian Howard that did not count because of a fumble, and they had a couple of drops in the end zone and a couple of plays that, this one could have been much, much worse, but Syracuse fans will certainly take this one. Eric Dungey, just a brilliant day on the field for the Orange. We'll give you his stats here while we're talking about it here. Eric Dungey, 21 of 27, 286 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. He also rushed for 3 more touchdowns. So Dungey has actually eclipsed Jim Brown for career rushing touchdowns in the history of Syracuse. Yeah, that Jim Brown. Speaking of rushing, Joe Morris honored today at the Carrier Dome, a long overdue and well-deserved honor for him. His number 47 goes to the rafters. I don't know if you guys saw this, a cool honor for Joe Morris, not only in that sense, but Syracuse long snapper Max Keller did something really neat in this game. So Max played the first half wearing number 47, but at halftime, it was officially retired, right? So Max Keller wore 48 for the second half of this football game and presumably will wear number 48 going forward. So we mentioned Eric Dungey's brilliant day. You know who else had a brilliant day for Syracuse? How about Sean Riley? As many people have described him, including I saw on Twitter, former Orange running back, another great back in Syracuse history, Larry Zonka, calling him a water bug. 6 catches, 120 yards, and a touchdown. But the big day for Sean Riley came on special teams because Riley had 2 kick returns, for 49 yards. And on punt returns, he had 2 for 110 yards and a touchdown. Syracuse's first punt return for a touchdown, not off a block since 2015. Special teams, huge, again, for the Orange today in terms of field position. Andre Schmidt was great, kicking field goals, but Sean Riley provides the huge boost for the Syracuse special teams today. A total of 9 different Syracuse receivers caught a pass today. Nykeem Johnson looking good out there, 7 catches for 78 yards. Taj Harris, the freshman, came in, had 2 catches for 35 yards, dropped one in the end zone, could have had a touchdown. Oh, well, the freshman will learn from that, right? Jamal Custis, kind of a quiet day, a big drop down the sideline, again, as he did in the Florida State game. So you want to see him step up and have a bigger day against Clemson next week. He had 2 catches for 22 yards, and on down it goes. On the rushing end, how about a shout-out for Mo Neal? Had kind of a quiet day in one sense because he didn't get in the end zone, but Mo Neal, 13 carries, 116 yards. We mentioned Dungey's 3 touchdowns. He had 77 yards rushing total. Dante Strickland had a 61-yard day, including a 51-yard run in the first half of this game. Jarvian Howard, we mentioned the fumble, but still came in looking pretty good. A third rushing option for the Orange for sure. He had 60 yards on the day on just 5 attempts, including a 52-yard run. So things looking great on the offensive end. Certainly on the defensive end, they look great again. That Syracuse pass rush for the second straight week absolutely relentless. Kyle Whitner led the Orange with 9 tackles overall, but it was Alton Robinson who haunted UConn's quarterback all day long on the pass rush. Chris Slayton, great again. Kendall Coleman, not only on the pass rush, but stopping some big running plays. I mean, UConn's quarterback was really their only weapon, David Hindell. That was it. That's all they had in this game. They didn't really have anything else on the offensive side. They certainly didn't have anything on the defensive side, as we saw, and Syracuse shut them down. So today, Syracuse had a total of, just to look at the official stats here, 6 sacks. So they tied the first time since 2006 that they had 6 sacks in a game. That was Syracuse and Wyoming at the Carrier Dome back in 2006. So another relentless effort by the Syracuse defense today. That pass rush is rolling. So what this all sets up now is Syracuse and Clemson next week, noon game, ABC, 2 undefeated football teams. And, of course, the Clemson Tigers are really going to be out for revenge after what happened at the Carrier Dome last year. And to think that both Syracuse and Clemson, I think we anticipated Clemson would be undefeated in this football game, but to anticipate Syracuse coming in undefeated as well and with an opportunity to really step up. Look, Syracuse is 4-0, and I am an AP voter. I vote in the AP Top 25. I've got to see how everything kind of shakes out for the rest of the night in college football. But they'll get strong consideration, not only from myself, but other AP voters. They got a couple votes last week. I don't think they'll get into the poll necessarily this week, but I think you're going to see them bump up in that others receiving votes category. You beat Clemson. I mean, all bets are off. Not only are you in the poll, you just shook up the entire landscape of college football, which we thought Syracuse did a year ago, but, Clemson went on and obviously had a terrific season and ended up in the national championship game once again. Clemson comes in, and Clemson's Clemson. They've got 2 quarterbacks now, Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence. Pardon me, Clemson rolled over Georgia Tech this afternoon. Trevor Lawrence looks like he's about to take over the starting job from Kelly Bryant, who, remember, got knocked out of the Syracuse game last year at the Carrier Dome. So even if you knock Kelly Bryant out, one of the best young quarterbacks in college football comes in for him. Clemson has, quite simply, the best defensive line I've ever seen on a college football team. All 4 of these guys are going to play in the National Football League. A bunch of them could have gone to the NFL last year, but chose to come back to Clemson this year. So going to Death Valley, they are clearly on their radar this year. I think Syracuse kind of snuck up on Clemson a year ago on Friday the 13th. Even if Kelly Bryant goes down, you've got a capable backup in Trevor Lawrence. That defense, this is going to be a huge challenge for Syracuse. But look, that's why you play the games. I think we found that out last year. I'm not going to predict Syracuse to win this game. I think Clemson is going to win this game convincingly. To be honest with you, I think Syracuse is in for a bit of a reality check next week. But, hey, you're 4-0. You've taken care of business. And, guys, I don't know if you saw the ACC scores today. Virginia Tech lost to Old Dominion. North Carolina beat Pittsburgh. Here, I'll just pull up the scores while we're talking about it here because it has been a wild, wild day in the ACC. So what does that mean? The ACC is wide open. It is wide open, and Syracuse has won 4 of their first 4 games with 8 to go. And you got to think 6 wins is not only a possibility, but certainly looking likely for Syracuse at this point. So you get back into a bowl game, and who knows what Syracuse can do in the ACC front. Now, you're in the same division as Clemson. That never helps when you're in the Atlantic Division with them, but it's a wide open league. So just looking at the scores today, Notre Dame smokes Wake Forest 56-27. We mentioned Old Dominion. Not only beat Virginia Tech, they beat them convincingly 49-35. Tech was ranked 13th in the country. Miami beat Florida International. Purdue, who came into this game 0-3, beats Boston College. Boston College got into the poll last week at number 23. They're going to be out of the poll this week. We mentioned North Carolina beat Pittsburgh. Louisville, it looks just awful this year by their standards. They're now 2-2 as they lost to Virginia 27-3. Duke rolled today 55-13 over North Carolina Central. I believe that's who they played. And hey, Florida State won today. Syracuse smoked them a week ago. They got back on the winning track today, 37-19 win over Northern Illinois. So what you have is a wide open ACC. And I got to tell you, I was talking with my good friend Anish Shroff on the radio this week. If you guys know Anish, He is used to work right here in Syracuse, used to be on the radio with me. He used to work at News Channel 9. Now he works for ESPN in a variety of roles, including play-by-play for college football. So I was talking to Anish this week, and he said, why can't Syracuse come into that game late in the year against Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium with only one loss? And just like many people, just the thought of that, I kind of chuckled at that. I said, no, that's just that, not this team. That's college football. You're going to stumble along the way here. It would be great if they both did. I mean, that could set up a college game day game in New York City. But how wild is that to suggest now? Because the ACC slate that's ahead of Syracuse beyond Clemson by no means is intimidating. Every game is winnable. Every game is manageable. I mean, look, it's college football. You're going to stumble somewhere. We've just seen that. Everybody just has a bad day or a bad game or two. But think of what the conversations were before the season. Can Syracuse just kind of get over the finish line and get to 6 wins in a bowl game? Well, there are already 4 wins in the bag and just need 2 to be bowl eligible, and who knows what they could do beyond that. They've got to keep it up. They've certainly got to improve on a lot of fronts. It's nobody's, as Dino Babers mentioned at his press conference, nobody's cashing any checks right now. But this is turning into a pretty strange year in the ACC, other than the team we all know is at the top of the mountain, and it's the team that Syracuse gets next week. So, see what you guys are saying in the comments here. Scotty saying, Brent, Syracuse was at 4 wins after the Clemson game last year. How did that play out? Just saying, that's a valid point that you bring up, because what happened was the defense fell apart at the end of the year. The difference being Syracuse has 4 on September, what's today? September the 22nd versus the 4th win on October 13th. You still should have got to a bowl game last year, but if that defense can stay healthy, there's a little more depth. That defensive line looks amazing right now. I think the linebackers are starting to come through. The secondary still has their weak points, but it's a matter of health. It's a deeper team. It's a bigger team. So, I mean, a bowl game is just an expectation at this point. If you don't go to a bowl game this year, I think you consider it a failure, given the start that you've had, the position that you put yourself in, the skill position levels that look better, how competitive you could be against some of the tougher teams on your schedule. But, Clemson, you call it a measuring stick. I mean, it's hard to measure yourself against one of the best teams in the country, but it's truly going to show you how good you are, how much you step forward, and what you have to do to compete in this league. As I mentioned it, Clemson does not have a weakness. They're deep at every position, and you're going to be tested. I think some of the mistakes that Syracuse made today, you make those in the first half. There were some tackling issues, which they seem to correct a bit in the second half. But if those things pile up against Clemson, they're just going to run by you. That's just how good they are. So that's a fair point to bring up. They had 4 wins. Everybody thought after beating Clemson they were going to roll to a bowl game, and they didn't. So we'll see. I think having that 4th win in your back pocket a couple weeks earlier helps, and you got to stay healthy. But I just think this is a deeper and a better football team than last year as well. ABC is where the game is. A couple of you guys asking about that. Channel 9 here in Syracuse or wherever your local ABC affiliate is next week, noon game. Once again, just like Florida State, when Syracuse played on ESPN that time, college game day's over, and Syracuse was, right there before everybody in a prime spot, and they're getting another big one coming up this week, technically next week. Today's still Saturday as we talk against Clemson. So what can you do against the Tigers this time around? Well, as Dino said at his press conference, they're going to show up and see what they can do. But you know what? Not only do you have to play perfect, which Syracuse had an amazing effort last year, that wasn't a fluke game. I mean, they straight up beat Clemson. You knocked out Kelly Bryant, which helped, but it's not like there was an abundance of turnovers or, that was not a fluke game. Syracuse manned up, and they beat that team. They beat them by 3. It took until the 4th quarter for it to happen, and a lot of things had to go their way. Eric Dungey had an amazing game, just as he has all year long, as he did today. By the way, he looked much healthier today. There's been some issues maybe with his shoulder, and, of course, he got something in his eye last week, and people were even wondering if he could play. He had blurry vision. Looked pretty good today. Didn't take a lot of hits. Tommy DeVito came in, got a little more time, so he's played in every game this season, right? If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I believe he's played in every game this season, but he's certainly played a lot more than your typical backup does, not only based on the big wins that Syracuse has had this year, but, Eric Dungey got knocked out of that Florida State game as well. So that's good news on Tommy's front if he's got to come in and step in for Eric Dungey. But you need a great performance out of Dungey. You need your defense to get some turnovers next week. And Syracuse brought out the razzle-dazzle just a little bit in this game. You can tell they're working on some things. So you got to take that crowd out of it at Death Valley, which is a hard thing to do. But it is a noon game. I'd rather play a noon game at Death Valley than an 8 o'clock game in Death Valley any day of the week. So Syracuse has just a little bit of things working to its advantage, but you got to pitch a perfect game if you're going to beat Clemson. You got to hope there's some fluky things that happen on their front. But again, throw talent aside, throw matchups aside. Clemson wants revenge. Clemson has been waiting for this game, and they are ready to pounce on Syracuse. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this goes down. There's going to be a lot of hype throughout the week. Clemson's going to be reminded all week of that Syracuse game. They can now hone in on it. So, Syracuse came into this game with a big disadvantage as it is. They come in with a real big disadvantage because Clemson is one ticked-off football team thinking about what happened last year. Forgot to note this. I don't know if you guys mentioned it in the comments. There was a key injury that we should mention. Ravion Pierce did not play in this game. It actually allowed Beeville native, oh boy, I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head here. We want to make sure we give him the proper shout-out here. Gabe Horan from Baldwinsville here locally in Syracuse. He steps into the game and catches a touchdown. His first career catch is a touchdown. He's going to take on a much bigger role at that tight end position. Ravion Pierce is out with an upper body injury, and Dino Babers didn't give much in terms of detail at his press conference, but what he did say is that he's out for a while. So we know that Ravion Pierce is going to be out for this week against Clemson and in the near future, and that's too bad because he provides a great red zone threat. I think he and Eric Dungy and even Tommy DeVito, when he was getting in, were establishing a rapport, and you want that tight end in this offense. You want that option there. So Gabe Horan's got some big shoes to fill. Antoine Cordy also, he played but had an air cast on, so that's why he did not return punts in this game, hence Sean Riley's big day in special teams. So two notable injuries there. One is going to keep Ravion Pierce out of this game, or out of this off this team, I should say, for the next few games at the very least. So I'll keep track of that and see when he can come back for the Orange. Rob notes, I think we all can agree it's going to be a long day a week from now in Death Valley. Right now, Syracuse is playing well in all three phases of the game. I feel like Pitt, UNC, and Louisville are winnable games. How great would it be to be 6-1 and bowl eligible come October 21st? After that, Syracuse would need to be playing just as well in all three phases to be equally as successful against some more challenging opponents. And that's a great point, Rob. They're not only playing well, they're playing well in all three phases. Again, there's hiccups on each of them, but you need that special teams kick. Your defensive line has just been dominant the last 2 weeks. I think we know they're going to be up against it this upcoming week. That Clemson offensive line doesn't get the attention that the defensive line does, because that defensive line may be one of the best of all time. But those are some big boys on that offensive line. So what Brian Ward has to do is he's got to dial up some creativity. I think the last 2 weeks, Syracuse just overwhelmed a bad Florida State offensive line and a younger, weaker UConn team. Well, Clemson, now you got to get creative. Now you've got to get in Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence's face because they'll both play. You got to watch Travis Etienne. They're a terrific running back. They've got some receivers that are invoking talk of Sammy Watkins when he was at Clemson a few years back. So Brian Ward, I think, has to have one of his more creative games as a defensive coordinator coming into this one, because you're not going to straight up man up against Clemson. You got to find different ways to get to the quarterback. Betty's saying that Syracuse can totally beat Clemson. They have the power. Reminds me of that old He-Man cartoon. They have the power, right? There you go. Troy saying that optimism is not a very CNY trait, but I'm going to try to break from that, saying I believe that we will win. I love the I believe chant. Went to Bishop Ludden High School here in Central New York. Got the green going today for that. We used to do that I believe chant all the time, and I think Syracuse fans are going to be saying it throughout the week. Troy saying, Brent, tell us what would have to happen for Syracuse to take the win on the road next week. I think we just were going over it a little bit. You got to get creative on defense. You're going to need at least 3 turnovers. You are going to need a typical Eric Dungy performance. I think you got to pull out a couple things out of your bag of tricks. Surprise Clemson. I think you need great special teams play, and you just have to play as mistake-free football as you can. You can't be overwhelmed by the moment. You can't be overwhelmed by Death Valley. They went there a couple of years ago. Things did not go well at all. So at least Eric Dungy's been there and done that, and at least can go in there a second time knowing what to expect. As can, some other key players on this team, but we've seen some freshmen come in that have made some key contributions, and you're going to need some of these unsung heroes. It's an all hands on deck, as mistake-free as possible, 3 phases of the game. And look, Clemson, as we said, is very emotional about this football game. So I think you got to pitch a perfect game, to be honest with you, to beat Clemson next week. I really do. But I think a lot of Syracuse fans, I think Clemson's going to open up probably as a 12 or a 13-point favorite in this game. I think Syracuse fans would take, if you just go in and, much like you go back to last year, Miami, LSU, Florida State, when Florida State was still good last year. Syracuse was just that close to have very competitive games against some name-brand programs. They didn't get over the hump in those 3 games, but they beat Clemson. I think most of us would take a good showing by Syracuse and Death Valley, right? Because they're just on another level. But, hey, man, college football, that's why you show up and play. As we saw in the ACC today, as we see every single week, Virginia Tech losing to Old Dominion today. Who would have given Old Dominion that win? Why is Virginia Tech going to Old Dominion, by the way? That's a recipe for disaster when you go on the road to play teams like that. But alas, that's what makes it entertaining, right? Sherry saying, so great to see Syracuse doing so well. The camaraderie is so evident. Sherry, you make a great point there, because this team is on the same page. They know exactly what they want to do and how they want to do it. Let me give you an example of a team that was awful in that category last week, and that was Florida State. Florida State's a mess. Their camaraderie's awful. Their chemistry's terrible. They don't know what they're doing and how they're doing it. Now, to be fair, they've got a new head coach, so they're getting used to a new system. But Syracuse, this is year 3 under Dino. They know exactly how they want to do it. You're not seeing chemistry problems out there. You're not seeing guys looking around like, where do I go and what do I do? They're locked in, and that's important if you're going to go out there not only to compete against Clemson next week, but to continue the string going and get as good of a season as you can here in 2018. Again, with the caveat always of having to stay healthy. Jason noting that need Custis to get out of his head and put up some big numbers. Yeah, I can't disagree with that, because he's getting opportunities, Jason. He's getting open shots down the sideline. He dropped pretty much the same exact pass 2 weeks in a row, flying down that sideline. He gets off that bus, right, and he just passes the look test. He's a big target. He's had some big games this year, but like I said, all hands on deck. You're going to beat Clemson in that secondary and that defense. You need who we think is your best receiver to really step up. But here's what I like about what I've seen the last few weeks, and I don't care who the opponent is. You've got to get in this rhythm. 8 or 9 different Syracuse receivers catching passes. You can attack Clemson with that. You can attack any of these teams coming up with that. That's a huge thing to have in your corner. Did you notice how fast Syracuse went today? And look, Syracuse orange is the new fast, right? But they went at an accelerated pace even beyond that. I talked to Dino Babers this week, and a little plug, I talked to him weekly on the radio. And I said, you're averaging 84 plays per game. That's 8th in the country. Where would you put that right now? Are you satisfied with that? And the first word out of his mouth was, that's too slow. You just know Dino always likes to push that pace. Not every possession, but a lot of possessions in this game, Syracuse was going even faster than they typically do. So you wonder if they can keep that up next week at Clemson. That's going to be tough given that defense. But if there's one thing you can do to keep a great defense back on their heels, let's go as fast as you possibly can, mix things up, and don't let them get comfortable. But Brent Venables is one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. He saw it against Syracuse last year and the past couple of years. He'll be ready for it. So that's where I think, Dino Babers, speaking of which, always loves to say that a football game's a chess match. He's got one heck of a chess match against this Clemson team. Does he have the pieces to beat him is the question. But you know what? You got to love being a Syracuse football fan in the sense that they're 4-0. You're feeling good about where they were going. Not a great crowd at the Dome today. I didn't see what the official attendance was listed at. I'll see if I can look that up while we're yakking about it here. But I reported before the game, just based on what I had heard and seen and based on ticket sales, there was a lot of giveaways and different discounts today, Military Appreciation Day and some other things. So you had a bunch of no-shows today. And it was a beautiful fall day in central New York. The apple picking time, right? So not the crowd that you want. I'm just pulling up the official attendance here while we're talking about it. If I could find it here, just give me one moment, and I could pull up. But one way or the other, it's a disappointing crowd at the Dome. 3rd straight home game in look, I've said it before, I'll say it again. You know, Syracuse is a fair weather sports town. It's a fair weather football town. That's no disrespect to the people that do show up and do appreciate this team and watch them week in and week out. But you know what? They kind of have you. The fans that are looking to come back are the fair weather fans, are the fans that, you know, they go when it's something to do. They go when there's kind of a buzz in the air about this football team. And, you know, look, if they can go in there and make some noise against Clemson, let alone win that game, which would be incredible if they could, you're going to start to get some of those fair weather fans back because they just show up when, you know, they feel it's worth their time. College football games, you're there 3.5 hours now. At least it wasn't a hot day in the Dome like it was last week. I can't find the official attendance numbers. We're yakking about it here, but suffice to say there's only about 30,000 people in the building today. So we'll see if that picks up. Syracuse, you know, look, the best recipe, of course, is you keep winning. You'll get people back. It's as simple as that. So what a win for Syracuse today. A 4-0 start, the first time since 1991. And I'll tell you what, we're going to come back next week, and we are going to do this all over again. We're going to do it after Syracuse and Clemson. That's a noon kickoff. So we'll be here right after the game, right about 3:30 or so, whenever that game is over. So why don't you come back next week and hang out with us, thanks to our friends at Krause Health, as we talk after that game. But for now, the Orange with a big win over UConn, 51-21. Little plug as well. Every Thursday on syracuse.com, my colleague and I, Nate Mink, put out a video. It's called Orange Weekly, it's a nice quick watch. It's usually only about 7 or 8 minutes. We talk about the 3 or 4 biggest topics in Syracuse football. We hear from Dino Babers and the players, and then we preview the upcoming game. We'll do it again this week, so look for that on syracuse.com on Thursday. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's a great way, Syracuse Orange Sports YouTube channel, to get it to you. Look for my recap tomorrow morning on syracuse.com. If you're watching this on Saturday, it'll be up on Sunday morning, the Syracuse Sports Podcast. I hope you can subscribe to that as well on iTunes and Google Play. We'll be talking plenty of Syracuse football on that next week. So enough with the plugs. You enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks for hanging out with us here on Facebook Live as the Orange beat Connecticut 51-21. It was all presented by Krause Health. We'll talk to you next week after another upset, perhaps. We shall see. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody.